listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Frederick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Shalom and welcome to this week's SLA Input. I'm Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and I'd like to continue our conversation about comprehensible input. I've been talking about that the last few episodes. Comprehensible input is input simply that a student can understand, and Creation's input hypothesis says that students need input that is just 1 degree more difficult than their current level in order to optimally acquire the language, or I plus 1, where I is the input plus 1 is just 1 degree more difficult. And so the last few episodes, I've been discussing how to make the very difficult input that we have in the biblical text primarily, how to make it more comprehensible. So today I'm going to introduce the basic idea of how to and why to increase the amount of comprehensible input, how to get more comprehensible input in your classroom, and particularly some of the problems that we have in terms of not getting enough comprehensible input, and overview the strategies of how you might do that to increase the amount of comprehensible input that you have in your classroom. So first, to address a few of the problems that we have typically in most of our biblical language classrooms. The first is that our students don't receive enough comprehensible input, or at least not as much as they could be receiving. Either the input is not comprehensible, or we're spending too much time in the native language, L1, rather than in L2. And a second issue related is that we teachers spend a lot of time talking about the language rather than using the language and thus providing comprehensible input. So that's a second problem. A third is that we really are up against time constraints. The academic programs we teach in often do not require a lot of languages, a year or less maybe. Students have limited time, limited energy, limited money to take extra classes even if they wanted to. And so we have these limitations and problems that we need to work with. So here are a few strategies or possible solutions to these. And this is an overview of what I'm going to be covering in the next few episodes, dealing with how to increase the quantity of comprehensible input in your classroom. So the first strategy or solution to these problems is to spend as much time as you can in the language. In other words, create an immersion or near immersion experience in your classroom. The American Council for the Teaching of Foreign Languages, affectionately known as ACTFL, recommends at least 90% or more of the class time being spent in the target language so that students are constantly receiving input, and hopefully it's comprehensible input. As a subcategory, a second strategy is to use what's known as total physical response. That is, TPR is what it's known as in other places. And this is especially useful for early stages in the language learning, although it can be used anywhere in the process. But early on, when students are just getting started, they don't have enough language data reserved to be able to speak and interact and have a conversation. TPR kind of fills in the gap because it's very teacher-fronted, where the teacher is providing all of the input, but the students are not passive listeners. They're going to respond in some way in terms of responding to commands given, and therefore they're actively listening, they're receiving input, they're responding to it, but they don't have to respond with actual language. Again, especially for these early stages. And then the third suggestion is to provide an extensive reading program. This would be requiring students to read a lot of material in and out of the classroom that's at their level and sometimes below their level to build up vocabulary, reading fluency, that kind of thing. So those three strategies I'm going to cover in greater depth in upcoming episodes, but just to give you a preview that there are some ways to kind of work around the constraints that we have to provide comprehensible input for our student. Because again, comprehensible input is essential for acquisition, but most of our students probably are not getting what they need to promote their proficiency in language. So these are the strategies, and I'm going to be covering these in the next few episodes. Immersion will be the first one, and then TPR, and then extended reading. I'll do a deep dive into each of those, hopefully bring in a few examples to help see what it might look like. In the meantime, I hope you have a great week.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.